Welcome back, duelists. With the new release of Cyberstorm Access right around the corner, many players are looking forward to the new meta deck coming out as well. And in today's video, we're going to be going over how to beat that new meta deck, and that is Superheavy Samurai. And now, like most things, in order to beat it, you have to first understand a little bit about it. So, what does Superheavy Samurai do? To keep it simple, they summon a bunch of monsters. They're actually able to search their deck multiple times, and then because they're summoning monsters and having constant resources flowing to their hand as well as the board, they're able to go into powerful boss monsters, whether that be a variety of synchros or link monsters. But essentially, they're going to put up a board of interruptions that make it really hard for you to play through it, okay? Sounds familiar? It's basically what New Age Yu-Gi-Oh! Is. But the thing that is about Superheavy Samurais is they're basically restricted to only monsters and pendulum monsters. They're not able to use spells or traps. So, that brings us to the first point. What is the best card to stop the Superheavy Samurai matchup? And I'm honestly really proud about this one, and because the best card to go against the Superheavy Samurais is Performapal Five-Rainbow Magician. Now, if you are a follower of the channel at all, we've actually been talking about Five-Rainbow for a couple of months now, so we are extremely excited to see that this is the #1 card used against the Superheavy Samurai matchup. And again, that is because it completely shuts down their deck due to them not being able to use spells or traps. And Five-Rainbow Magician essentially says if you cannot set any back row, your effects are negated on the board, and then your monsters are unable to attack. So, no effects, no attacks. Essentially, that is putting Superheavy Samurais out of commission turn 1. So this is actually the perfect card against the Superheavy Samurai matchup. And honestly, it's really good in a bunch of decks, especially some of the meta decks up and coming, such as Pirelli. It's great in the Labyrinth, as well as decks such as Runic. So I'm actually just very excited to see this in the matchup against Superheavy Samurais. But keep in mind, there is only one card in their deck right now that is able to out it, and we're going to probably be seeing them increase it to about 3 in their build, especially if they start getting used or getting beat by the Five-Rainbow Magician early on, and that is Archfiend Eccentric. Because of its pendulum ability, you can essentially get rid of it and then pop the Five-Rainbow Magician on the opponent's board. So we're going to be seeing an increase in play with the Eccentric Archfiend. So that being said, they have to open it to out the Five-Rainbow Magician. If they don't, then it's pretty much GG turn 1 for them. Now, what are some other cards that you can use to beat the Superheavy Samurais, especially if Five-Rainbow Magician is not something you want to be playing? So we're going to be going over a few of them, and these are some cards that are really good going first. And one of the best cards going first against Superheavy Samurais is Deck Devastation Virus. Now, I know not every deck can utilize Deck Devastation Virus, but if your deck can, you will completely blow out the Superheavy Samurai matchup, because almost every, if not every, one of their monsters in their starting hand is below 1500 attack. So you wipe out their hand, for the next 3 turns, they're all going to be monsters. They're going to be revealed and sent to the graveyard, and then essentially you're going to have 3 turns to do whatever you want with that deck. And honestly, it's going to be game over. We know that in Yu-Gi-Oh! It will be over by then. They're probably just going to scoop it up right then and there, honestly. But what can you do if you cannot be fitting the Deck Devastation Virus in your deck? And like we like to say, you floodgate them. So the first one on this list is Rivalry of Warlords. Now, all their Superheavy Samurais are machines, but a lot of their boss monsters that they're going into, including some of the bridges that lead to their bigger Superheavy Samurai synchros, are not machine. So if you flip Rivalry or Warlords, you're going to be essentially limiting them into their smaller samurais, and they're going to prevent them from the dangerous boss monsters being put out against you, okay? So Warlords, definitely a great card to be playing in there. And then another reason we've actually been seeing an increase in play, especially in the OCG of Rivalry, is because with the Pirelli deck, you actually will then prevent yourself from being kaiju'd as a side deck card against some of your boss monsters, while completely limiting the monsters that your opponent will be summoning. So after Rivalry, the next card on this list is Summon Limit. And again, it is a monster mash deck. So if you're able to Summon Limit against the Superheavy Samurai matchup, then essentially they're going to go into literally 2 monsters, not going to be able to link off with them, synchro off with them, and it's just going to completely end their combo right there. And since it's a deck of all monsters, that's it. It's over for them. You're proceeding on your turn, and essentially going to probably be wiping them out altogether, especially since they're going to never be able to get any of their combos started with Summon Limit on the board. And again, essentially going to have to be relying on things like Archfiend Eccentric to pop it from the board. Other good going first cards against the Superheavy Samurais are other cards that kind of, floodgate them, such as Power Filter. And we've been seeing Power Filter kind of as a niche little tech being played here and there, but against decks like Pirelli and Superheavy Samurais, Power Filter is a phenomenal card, okay? Prevents the summoning of most of their starters, okay? Against Pirelli, pretty much shuts them down. And against the Superheavy Samurai, they basically just have a couple cards that will get around Power Filter, and even some of their bridges, the links that they bring into, like Scarecrow, will just not be able to be used at all with Power Filter on the board, thus shutting down their combos right then and there. Another card that can actually be utilized against them, which might sound a little weird, is Anti-Spell Fragrance. And yes, they don't play spell cards, but they play pendulums. And as we know, you cannot set pendulums face down. So if Anti-Spell Fragrance is on the board first, they will not be able to be using any of their pendulum monsters, which their newest card, Prodigy, one of the best cards in their deck, will be useless, okay? And as well as their Giant Benkai, okay? It's another pendulum that's out. Essentially, two of their best cards will be useless with Anti-Spell Fragrance on the board. But if Anti-Spell is something you cannot be suffering through, then do consider kind of cards such as Unending Nightmare, where basically if they activate a pendulum, in chain, you'll activate the Unending Nightmare's continuous effect, pay the 1,000, blow up their pendulum monster, and essentially rid them of those combo pieces. So overall, these are some of the best going first cards against the Superheavy Samurai matchup. After that is going second cards. It's a coin flip game. Sometimes you go first, sometimes you go second. So what are some of the best going second cards against the Superheavy Samurai matchup? Number one on the list, and should be a surprise to not a lot of people, is Dark Ruler No More. Again, they're a monster mash deck, putting up a board full of monsters, Omni negates, pretty much a bunch of interruptions. You activate Dark Ruler No More, negate all their monster effects, they can't respond to it, and then you proceed with your turn and then just kind of board break them from there. So Dark Ruler No More will definitely be seeing an increase of play going into this next format. After that, some more cards if you're going second against them is Droll and Lock Bird. And again, they add a bunch of cards from the deck to the hand. A lot of the cards such as Soul Piercer will do that. So Drone Lock will be a phenomenal card going against Superheavy Samurais, just cutting off their combo lines early on. So you just make sure that even if they establish somewhat of a board, it's not as good as it could have been. And we're seeing Drone Lock actually spike in playability in these upcoming formats. So do keep an eye on that. And then last but not least on this little page of going second is Shared Ride. Maybe you don't want to draw them. Maybe you want to draw cards, every time they add from the deck or graveyard to their hand. Shared Ride is a card to be testing out in that regard. It's essentially the max C of adding. Instead of the special summon you draw, it's when they add you draw. So do keep that in mind. It's a little niche card, but I do believe we're going to be seeing some play with that coming up. Now, some other going second cards, and these are cards that are interrupting them during their turn, especially, is Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. And this has actually been seeing a really good increase in play as well in the OCG, and that's because, again, they play pendulum monsters. They'll use the pendulum effects in the pendulum zones to be doing something, so you can actually then chain your Ghost Ogre Snow Rabbit, blow up their pendulum card, and then prevent that effect from going off in general. So it's kind of a 2-for-1. You keep the effect from going off, as well as getting rid of one of their best cards in their deck off their board. Next up is, again, Monster Mash deck. They're summoning multiple monsters in a turn, so we're definitely going to be seeing an increase in play with Nibiru, the Primal Being. 5 monsters being summoned in that deck is nothing. Again, it's all monsters, constant summons, so Nibiru will be a definite seeing an increase in play against the Superheavy Samurai matchup. And then, last on this going second interruption list, kind of a niche card again. Some might tech it, some might say, you know, it's not for me, but do consider little cards such as Gnome Material, okay? Essentially, on their first special summon, while you have no cards, you'll activate the Gnome Material, and then it'll prevent their starters from being able to be linked or synchroed with. Essentially, whatever that special summon monster is, it's unable to be used as any material, and it essentially will hinder their combos long term. Now, again, this might not be something you want to fit in your deck, but I do believe we're going to be seeing a little bit of play with it in decks like this, because if they can't get started early on, they won't be able to go into the full big end board right there. But definitely cards such as Nibiru and Ghost Ogre will be seeing a lot of play against this deck. And some more going second cards, except these are board breakers. So if they already established a board and you need to get around it, you might not be, you know, utilizing the Dark Ruler no more. These are definitely some cards you should be considering. And the first on the list is Santa Claus. Now, it's kind of a single spot removal, a bunch of kaiju kind of effects, but it's actually been seeing an increase in popularity, especially in the OCG, and that's because not only is it good at spot removing against Superheavy Samurais, but it's good at spot removing the Pirelli boss monsters that can't be affected. I believe it's Noir. So this card is kind of a 2-for-1. It can be side decked against other decks as well as against Pirelli. So we've been seeing Santa Claus seeing an increase in play. Now, if you need to be hitting out more monsters, maybe there's something out multiple Omni Negates or an Omni Negate and then something that can be keep activating on your board or on their board during your turn, do consider Kirakara Div Incarnate. And since the rise of Kashtira, we've actually been seeing just a spike in playability with Div Incarnate in the metagame. And we're not going to be seeing that go down anytime soon, I can assure you. So Div Incarnate, overall, just an amazing card. If one card spot removal like Santa Claus isn't enough, do consider the Div Incarnate. And again, last on this list for the board breakers is another card, which is Sphere Mode. So if one, spot removal isn't enough, maybe whatever Div Incarnate's doing isn't for you, do consider cards such as Sphere Mode, because that will completely devastate the opponent's board. Now, again, I was saying Santa Claus has been seeing a little bit more play because the decks like Pirelli aren't, full dedicating boards of 3. They just got 1 or 2, and then 1 is basically unaffected by things like Dark Ruler no more. So that's why we're seeing Santa Claus kind of dual-sided in people's side decks. So these are definitely cards to consider going second against the Superheavy Samurai matchup, especially if they're already establishing a board. Now, if you're getting anything from this video, do consider hitting that sub button. We really do appreciate the support. But what are the best cards to beat the Superheavy Samurai matchup that we have actually listed already in the video? Number 1 is Performapal Five-Rainbow Magician. Again, if your deck can be putting this in the main or the side, you're going to be seeing a lot of victory, especially against this main deck, but it can actually hinder a lot of meta decks going forward. And I think we're actually going to be seeing a lot of players understanding just how good this card is. Next on the list is Deck Devastation Virus. Again, if your deck is actually able to utilize this, definitely do so. It will just one-shot out Superheavy Samurai matchup, and you'll be very glad you put it in. After that, third on the list is Dark Ruler No More. Surprise to no one. Card's just going to be really insane to going against Superheavy Samurais, especially if you're going second. Then last on the list is Nibiru, the Primal Being. Just completely shut down their turn, have them summon 5 or more monsters, destroy their board, wreck it all together, then you're going to be winning the game on your next turn. So guys, these are the best ways to defeat the Superheavy Samurai matchup. And again, if you like the video, if you keep seeing your way back to the channel, especially for things like the Performapal Five-Rainbow Magician, do hit that subscribe button. Our numbers are flying up and I super appreciate it. But most importantly, stay safe, have a good night, and suck it, nerds.